Wolf, wolf, hunt them far and yonder.
The forest is brimming with wolves. It's my job to hunt them down, not yours.
But we could hunt them together. Wolves, bears, dragons even.
She's one of them wolf walkers.
Wolf walkers?
The ones that can talk to wolves with some wild magic.
You can come out now. We can smell ya. You stink. You're a wolf walker. You're a wolf when you sleep. What? A girl when you're awake. Robin! Something's happened to me. Yeah, I can see that. It's flippin' great. You're a wolf now. Be a wolf. The woods are getting smaller every day.
These wolves, they're just beasts.
Tonight we put an end to this.
I promise your mother I'd keep you safe.
I have to help her. You have to leave. No way. I scared him off.
Hi, I'm Claudia Puig. I'm a Vidiots board member, and I'm thrilled to be here with the wonderful directors of WOLFWALKERS, Tomm and Ross Stewart. And we're going to have a Vidiots tribute conversation. And I just want to say that Vidiots is enormously supportive of the animation community and the international filmmaking community. And we're looking forward to programming more of films like this at Vidiots when we reopen in our new home. So thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for having us on, Claudia.
Oh, we're thrilled. Thank you so much for your visually dazzling, exciting, imaginative, and heartfelt film. It's a joy. So
It's nice of you to say.
Well, I know many people feel the same way. How did you come up with this story set in the era that it was, and how did you have a sense that this would work for audiences, young audiences as well as mature audiences?
It was based on folklore from the city here in Ireland where we grew up, which is really a small town, but it's a medieval city because it has a cathedral or something.
That's Kilkenny, right?
Kilkenny, yeah. And so we grew up here, and the folklore or fairy tales around here were about people who were cursed by St. Patrick when they wouldn't convert, pagans, and so they became, when they fell asleep, they would leave their bodies as wolves, So Ross and I were just talking about that folklore as a basis and setting it in Kilkenny. And then at the time of the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell came over and decided he was going to show he had control over Ireland by wiping out the wolves, and that would be a way to show that he could tame the country. And so we thought about mixing up that folklore from around here with the true history of when the wolves were eliminated by trying to tell a story about a little girl who comes over with her dad, and she wants to be a hunter like him at the start, like most kids want to be like their parents. But she starts to realize that she makes friends with a little Irish girl who is one of these wolf walkers. And so she realizes that her new friend is one of the wolves that her dad is hunting. So that's where the conflict would come from,
And that conflict, even though it opens our awareness of history, also speaks to problems that we have today. The Lord Protector is like a strongman, autocratic leader. We're seeing a lot of that around the world. Fortunately, we just got rid of ours, but fascism in general has been on the rise, and his efforts to control and put down the indigenous people. Did that also influence your decision to tell the story now?
Definitely. And I think like when Tomm and myself were coming up with the story and developing it with the screenwriter, Will Collins, we were probably more worried that some of the themes that we were addressing would be irrelevant when we released the film, that maybe the Amazon rainforest might be saved. Maybe the rise of the right might be curtailed, and people might swing back to the left again. So a lot of these themes, yeah. And then as we were in production, we were looking at the news and we are like, oh my God, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Even like to the stage that when we were painting the forest backgrounds on fire, the news was showing forest fires in Australia, in Brazil, in South America, all around the world. So we were like, oh my God, it's like humans haven't learned, and we're just doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So I think one of the nicer things that came about during production was there were young activists like Greta Thunberg coming to the fore and speaking out about these things, and we were able to see maybe an echo of Robin in in young people like that. So that gave a little bit of hope that maybe if the next generation come out and start fighting for these things to be fixed, maybe we might fix them.
Yeah, it does seem like they're doing that. Well, your movie has everything in it because it has those social statements, it has action, it has emotion, it has darkness and light. It's charming, it has humor, of course, but you don't shy away from those darker underpinnings. And how did you balance all that tonally? Because that's got to be challenging to achieve the perfect balance that you did.
I think tone is probably the biggest lesson I've learned in my career as a filmmaker. This is my third time out as a director or co-director, and I felt that Ross and I were both very conscious of tone right from the beginning, and we didn't want to make a movie that was too dark, even though it kept veering that way as we were working on the script with Will Collins, the screenwriter. Ross and I kept on finding that the history had a lot of fascinating but very dark elements that we were researching. So we had to just keep on pulling it back. What I'd learned over the years, keep pulling it back to the point of view of our child protagonist, Robin, and we should only learn about this world as she does and see the world through her eyes. And in that way, when we meet Maeve, it's the same time that Robin meets Maeve, more or less. And the whole world is seen through the point of view of this 11-year-old girl, and how she experiences the world is how we experience that world. So we try not to go over her head, and therefore we're kind of taking the audience on a journey that's, age appropriate. And we didn't want to get into the really dark stuff because we can imply that with there's a certain ambiguity around it in the movie, but if you got into the really true history, it would be quite traumatic.
Yeah, it would be traumatic even for an adult. But an important thing, though, I think all three of us were aware, was not to sugarcoat it. And kids' films, our family films, don't need to be sugarcoated. I mean, we grew up with stories of books by Roald Dahl and that. He wasn't afraid to go into maybe scarier things, and a lot of the great folktales that people grew up with weren't afraid to go into scary things or danger, or like angry people, or like the bad guy, or like monsters or anything. And I think there was a time, contemporary kids' films were so sugar-coated that there was absolutely no danger, and that doesn't really prepare children for the outside world. I think it's important for lessons to be learned in a story, for there to be some element of realism there, so that there's an echo of the real world outside. So while we were conscious to pull it back from these really, really dark areas, we didn't want to pull it back so much that it was just like no danger at all. Like, in the start of the film, there is danger, and Merlin gets shot, and you realize that this is a real world scenario where creatures can get injured and that.
Yeah, and I think seeing that in a safe environment when you're a child, maybe talking to your parents and working through it is certainly more helpful than never seeing it and having the world sugar-coated that you see, and then suddenly going out into the much less sugary.
I think it's the book, The Uses of Enchantment. It's the idea that fairy tales were codes to prepare children for the adult world ahead of them.
Yeah,
the danger would be that you get to like 18 years of age and you go off to college or something, and the whole world is suddenly scary and you just don't know how to cope in it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah. So I've always been upset about the way wolves are maligned in literature and in movies. You know, the big bad wolf, they're like the horrible, you know, beast. And, you know, they're seen as wicked and sneaky and evil, and they're so iconic. And I was so happy to see them redeemed, in a sense, in your film.
I think themes of speciesism were important to Ross and I. You know, we're both very interested in ecology and animal rights and stuff. And I think whenever we imbue negative human attributes to any species, then it's only a short skip to calling the other in the human species that animal, and then there you have it. If you decided that snakes are evil, you just call your enemy a snake, and then, you know, you've got a double whammy of unfortunate situations. So we kind of wanted to speak to that as well, that there's two ways of looking at the wolves in the movie. And, you know, in one sense, they're a big puppy pile for Maeve. They're like her family. But for the people who are chopping down the woods, they're pretty terrifying. And I guess, you know, that kind of represents how humans have interacted with animals.
Yeah, one of the interesting things during the research into the wolf folktales and the history is that all across Europe, like, the wolves became this symbol for savagery and, like, you know, demonic, you know, like familiars, and like the evil that needed to be tamed around the same time as Puritanism came to the rise, you know, around that era. And I think it was because the human society at that time were trying to elevate themselves above nature. And because the wolf is such a strong symbol of freedom and nature and living with the wilderness, that it automatically became the bad guy. And if you go back further in time in the folktales, there was a respect to this animal, to this megafauna, as another part of the ecosystem, because people were maybe living more in tune with nature rather than trying to elevate themselves above nature. So there's a fascinating history with, like, how the wolf was maligned around that time.
That is fascinating. Yeah. And ironically, you know, we love dogs, and dogs are descended from wolves. So, you know, let's say, I love that your film respects the intelligence of children and has strong female characters. And it also questions the idea of, like, blind obedience to authority, and stresses the importance of caring about others and standing up for what's right. It just has these wonderful values. What have you heard back from people who've seen it, parents and kids? What have been some of the things you've heard in response to your film?
Yeah, we've had some great feedback, you know, and I've been happy that it even worked. Like, my granddaughter's 3 years old and she was able to enjoy it. I thought it would have been a bit too scary for her, but it seems to work on a wider range than we originally thought, sort of 6 to 8 years old. And yeah, we recently showed it. There was, my wife teaches like 7 to 8 year olds, and during the production of the movie, we would show them rough cuts to get their feedback and to make sure it was working.
Your own little focus group.
Yeah, a little focus group, yeah, in the Irish language school here in town. And then her current class, which hadn't seen it before, because each year we've been working on it for years, and those kids, the first kids who saw the first storyboards are probably teenagers now, you know. But yeah, this group watched it, and it was amazing to me how much they got out of it. You know, we had a little video chat after they'd watched it, and I was delighted how much of the themes they got and how much they understood of what we were trying to get across. I always thought it was kind of designed to work on several levels. Like, probably my little granddaughter just enjoys howling like the wolves, and she gets a kick out of Maeve and she laughs. But these 7 to 8 year olds were having fairly intelligent discussions about the themes and the ideas in it. So I was happy about that.
That's fantastic. I want to ask you about your visual inspirations to create the magical world of the forest and the cave. With that overall look, what inspired you the most in creating that?
Oh, there was quite a lot of inspiration. I mean, it's hard to even pinpoint it down into a couple of inspirational points, because I think Tomm, myself, and the team took inspiration from basically any kind of visual art, even non-visual art. Like, we had printmakers, we had sculptors, we had graphic designers and illustrators all on the team, and they each brought their own art form into the mix. I think at the start, Tomm and myself had very clear kind of visual language to explore, that the town had to represent a cage for Robin, had to represent like a, you know, rule by authority. And so we had a lot of geometrical kind of aggressive mark making, patterning. We tried to create the city almost like a maze, so that Robin found it hard to escape, and so it became more of a trap for her. And then in contrast to that, the forest had to exude this wildness and freedom and creativity and like kind of lush opulence, you know. So that really, as Robin journeys from the town to the forest, she goes from being in her cage to like experiencing freedom, like true freedom. So I think when Tomm himself had those kind of ideas, then all the people that came on to help with concepts and visual design and like art direction and scene illustration and everything, they all amped it up another level. You know, everyone that came on brought it up another level. So really, I think with the visual language that exists in the film now is a testament to probably like, you know, 100, 200 people.
Wow, a very collective work there.
Mm-hmm.
I love the contrast in how Maeve and her mother look, the flowing ginger hair, the rounder beings, and just their kind of overall exuberance. And then the townspeople are more angular and pinched and tired looking.
Mm-hmm. Sickly. Yeah. I think that's like that fed into the same art direction, I suppose, as the environments. Like the environments and characters have to go hand in hand, really, so that the characters feel like they live in the same world as the backgrounds. But really, Tomm had a hand in the character design a bit more than me, and he brought on some people who were really, really talented. Some of them straight out of college as well, and they had this kind of I don't know, freshness to them, so that they wouldn't be exactly how Tomm myself would draw characters. They had a kind of an edge. And one of the main character designers, Federico, he was really good at doing caricatures, and he managed to put a lot of the crew into the film. So Tomm myself are in there, and a lot of the people in the crew are in there.
Like the townspeople or the other?
Yeah, the townspeople. So he had a job in making it seem a little bit more monstrous than we probably.
It wasn't too hard.
It's sort of like a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Another thing that we brought into the characters, Claudia, that if people look closely, I hope that they notice that they move differently. Like the wolves move like a big mass, all unified, where the soldiers are all like little individual cogs in a machine or little clockwork people. And the lines, with the way they're drawn, the soldiers and all the townspeople are drawn with a very hard black outline. Whereas if you look at the wolves and Maeve and the wolfwalkers or any animal in the forest, they're scratchy, and we leave the construction lines in, and there's certainly a slightly more liveliness to them because their lines aren't so cold and dead, you know. So there's something, I guess it's subtle, but I think people that watch it, especially kids who watch it and try and draw the characters themselves, they might notice the difference, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. You absorb it, even if you're not consciously, you just feel it. And you also incorporate that kind of angular woodblock style. It seems like that sort of differentiates the staid and regimented lives of the townspeople versus the sort of enchanted life of the Wolfwalkers. You tell us a little bit about that?
Well, like woodblock. Oh, sorry, Ross.
I know you go ahead.
The woodblocks were a reference from that time period, where a lot of the historical visual reference we were finding was in woodblock prints. So there was a lot of pamphlets and stuff printed at the time that were kind of propaganda about the Irish and how wild and untamed they were and stuff. So we tried to bring some of that, the visual language of the woodblock prints, into how we drew the townspeople and Lord Protector Cromwell and stuff. And yeah, like you were saying, Ross, like the expressiveness of the forest was kind of supposed to be like a subjective way, how it felt for Robin to be in the forest, felt so free, and she could feel more expressive there than in the town, where she has to be all kind of buttoned up and squared off like a woodblock print.
And what about the colors too? Because I loved sort of the autumnal hues that you had for daytime, and then the blues that you use sort of for nocturnal scenes after Robin becomes a wolfwalker.
Yeah, I think we knew that like Maeve being like the little Irish wild kid, we kind of knew early on that she was going to have this big orange red mane of hair, you know, being like a typical like poster girl for the Irish, the old Irish way of life, you know. So orange became a very dominant color like throughout the entire film, and basically orange then we had to set it in autumn so that we'd be able to utilize, you know, orange as much as possible. And really, like the autumnal forests in Ireland are still very, very green. So in a lot of the forest scenes, we have like the green undergrowth and then the orange leaves on top, and then we usually have white skies, so it's really like the Irish tricolour, the green, white and gold of the Irish flag. But that wasn't necessarily a patriotic decision to do that. But yeah, the whole color theme was to really, like, again, to reinforce the idea that the forest is a free, like, exuberant, kind of wild, beautiful place, and we tried to put in like wildflowers and as much color as stuff as possible. And then in contrast to that, the town needed to be very, very washed out, being built out of stone and wood, and it's under military occupation. So really the only color you see there is the big like red cross of the English forces that have been in there. So really there's a color contrast as well throughout the entire film.
Interesting. So many of your designs look really intricate and very complex. How could you talk a little bit about the fusion of hand-drawn animation and digital?
It's mostly hand-drawn, the movie. We used the computer to kind of help put it all together. So like the backgrounds are drawn on paper with pen and pencil and stuff, and then there's another background separately painted in color, and in Photoshop or on the computer we combine the lines with the colors. And for the characters, we draw them on tablets, but they're all drawn frame by frame. So there's an artist's hand that you feel, even if we're using computers to speed up the process. Probably the most, where it was most intricate was when we saw the world through the eyes of Robin when she was a wolf. And we're actually looking at the world like from her point of view. And we called those sequences like wolf vision. And that was like really interesting to figure out, because wolves don't have the same range of color, but we wanted to represent how heightened their other senses are, like hearing and smell and all. So we did a kind of a fun trick where the world will be built in very rudimentary CGI, like virtual reality using the Oculus, and we'd be able to figure out exactly where Robin's looking and what height she was or how much her head was moving very quickly and cheaply using the Oculus. But then each frame would be printed out and drawn over with pencil and charcoal, so that what you ended up with on screen was, again, hand-drawn on paper rather than something that looked very digital. And I think it's just an ethos Ross and I wanted to bring, that we wanted the film to be like a celebration of hand-drawn animation, and to do stuff with hand-drawn animation that you normally don't get to do by using technology. But we wanted what ended up on screen to have that timelessness of a kind of picture book or, you know, old school animation.
Definitely.
And when you speak to the enormous amount of detail that's in there, I think that's more to do with some of our artists loving drawing so much that they don't know when to stop, maybe. And a lot of the time you'd have to almost say like, okay, I think this is finished. I think the background is finished, but there'd be so much detail in there. And I think it's just because people love to draw and they love to keep on drawing on it. And like the artists would love their artwork, so like would put so much into their own artwork. That was a really beautiful thing to see. So, you know, you wouldn't want to stop them a lot of the time.
Challenge. I'd never had this on previous productions, but we were literally trying to get the artists to tone it down. Maybe there was an excitement amongst the younger people that had grown up and had been fans of our stuff, and then maybe amongst some of the older crew that had been with us since the beginning, they felt, okay, this is the last part of this trilogy, we really want to give it socks. So sometimes Ross and I were like, oh no, it's fine, you don't need to put any more detail in.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Director, and as an independent animation producer, it's an amazing problem to have, where you find that your crew are giving you 110%. It's really lovely.
And talking about that trilogy too, in a way, do you see that as kind of a love letter to Ireland, to your homeland, or what made you decide to sort of come up with this idea of a trilogy in the way that you did?
Yeah, it evolved. I didn't come up with the idea for it to be a trilogy, but I remember during Song of the Sea feeling like I wanted one more go, and that 3 would be a nice number. I felt I'd learned a lot making Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. So, and Ross and I were coming up with an idea for a film together. It felt natural that we'd make it as a kind of final part of the triptych, but it's very loose as a trilogy. And yeah, I joked during the production that it's about the 3 Ds of Ireland, of Irish culture. There's the church, there's depression, and there's the English. So,
I love it. I loved Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea both. This is just
yeah. I don't know. It turned out you never have a long enough life to really to really know where you're going to go. But if I'd known back then that we were going to spend 20 years making the 3 movies, I might have run for the hills. But as it turned out, yeah, it has ended up, and very much a love letter to the culture and stuff that we maybe rejected as kids. You know, as kids, I think me anyway, I was really in love with like American animation, Japanese animation, comic books from Europe, anywhere but here. And so it's sort of nice to think that we've put stuff out there that Irish kids for another generation can enjoy, and hopefully reinterpret the stories again. Who knows what the next generation of Irish storytellers will do, or what medium they'll use, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now there is this Irish School of Animation too, thanks to you, both of you. So that's amazing. I loved also the parent-child relationships, the sort of the sense of the growing independence and empowerment that both girls experience. And it was really nice to see parents as imperfect, but also good people. You know, it wasn't like the evil stepmother or the all good this or that. But I thought that those parent-child bonds evolved in interesting ways, in really intriguing ways. Was that, did you have discussions about that, making sure that there was that emotional depth, or how does something like that evolve?
Yeah, early on, Ross and I talked about how they had Maeve's mum and Bill, Robin's dad, had kind of the alternate parenting attitude. You know, the two where Maeve's mum is kind of, the scenes aren't in the movie, but there was originally scenes where Maeve's mum was trusting Maeve, giving Maeve the responsibility and trusting her. And at the beginning, Dad was saying to Robin, no, I can't give you the freedom you want because I'm afraid, or I want to take care of you and make sure you're safe, and I don't trust you to take care of yourself. So that contrast was there. It kind of got dialed back a little bit as the story evolved, but it was always in there in the character arc of both characters, you know.
Yeah, and ironically, like you know, Bill is afraid that Robin, you know, isn't prepared for like the world being such a dangerous place, and you know, like she'll end up in the stocks or end up in jail or whatever. But like the reality is that through that she'll probably end up trapped in a life of, you know, servitude to the Lord Protector, like washing dishes and stuff. Whereas in contrast, Maeve and Moll live surrounded by wolves, so they live surrounded by the danger that the townspeople are actually afraid of. And so it's quite interesting that Moll then gives Maeve so much freedom and so much responsibility, because she kind of has to look after the pack, you know. And we wanted Robin and Maeve to have this kind of like odd couple or almost Gilgamesh kind of story arc, that each is fulfilling a little something that the other is missing. So while Robin is missing freedom and needs to, like, you know, break out of herself and run free like a wolf, Maeve also needs a little bit of that kind of responsibility, needs to kind of learn what to do in order to save her mother, so that the two do kind of like, you know, help each other out at the end and form like a better cohesive family unit, you know.
Mm-hmm. You talked about sort of the timeless quality that you were seeking in terms of the visuals, and there is a very definite timeless quality to your story. And it made me think about, you know, the films that you grew up on and what influenced you, because obviously at Vidiots, our core mission is the accessibility of films for, you know, future filmmakers as well as, you know, just people who enjoy films. What were some of the influences or films that made a big impact on you as kids?
I think the first animated feature I remember being blown away by. Like, I remember going to see Snow White as a small kid and being so afraid of the witch that my dad told me to look at the projector. So when the witch came on, I'd see the witch tiny up in the projector box because I couldn't handle her on the big screen. But I remember a few years later at a birthday party seeing The Secret of Nim, and that one just was so immersive and just it was so amazing. And a few years later, then I realized that the filmmakers who made The Secret of Nim were in Dublin, and it was the Don Bluth studio, and so that made it really weirdly accessible or believable that you could be an animator in Ireland. So the idea that these films that were so lush were being made up the road in Dublin was very exciting for me as a kid. And I suppose I often talk about how there was a lot more darkness in the films I grew up on. Like I remember loving Labyrinth, you know, the Jim Henson movies, Dark Crystal, Never Ending Story, E.T., you know, these kind of movies, they had a lot more depth and a lot, I suppose, a bit more darkness, but they were more like psychological. I think they were made by, you know, hippies from the 60s or something. Were making movies in the 80s. So I guess me and Ross are the hippies now from the 90s that are making them.
I was going to make the same point though, like that that the films, I can remember like enjoying films like The Jungle Book, and Robin Hood I think was the first film I saw in the cinema. I can't remember what age I was, but they, like, I remember enjoying them, and like I'd still enjoy watching The Jungle Book today. It's just like so beautiful, and it's such a kind of easygoing, like, you know, film to watch. But in the same way, the films that made a bigger impression on me, like made much more of an impact, were films like Watership Down. I used to watch a lot of the films like Tarka the Otter and the Pit Ponies as well, about, like, you know, animals helping out humans, and they often had like really tragic endings for the animals. You know, it was like it was okay in those times to like sacrifice an entire, like, you know, an entire basically pit full of ponies just to help the miners get out. But I remember watching those as a child and being really traumatized, but it definitely would teach you a lesson, and maybe that's why I was making Wolfwalkers there.
True, like the Black Stallion, and there were so many movies like that, and I think tone really resonates with me, because it is true. It was the edgier stuff that stuck with me, even if they weren't brilliant movies, like they weren't perfectly scripted or anything like that. They usually dealt with something that was getting to the core. It's pretty psychological and psychedelic, you know, like Never Ending Stories, and nothingness is enveloping everything, and it's all being lost, like heavy stuff. And then when that horse gets lost in the swamp of despair, I mean, come on.
Yeah. So, well, it would be great if someday we have you come to Vidiots and we show your films, or we have you introduce some of these favorite films, because that would just be, that's our dream.
I'd love to, yeah.
We look forward to that. Thank you so much. It's been such a great conversation, and congratulations on your Oscar nomination. More importantly, congratulations on making this wonderful film.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to Vidiots for having us come on here as well.